Here's something to think about. How does your prospect show up to the meeting with you? And how is this influenced by every other sales experience they've ever had up to that point? I mean, think about it. Do they come in prepared to share their vulnerabilities and to do some deep thinking about their decisions they've made and partners they've chosen? Or do they enter the conversation pretty much knowing they can sit back, learn, listen, as you share your ideas and solutions to try and convince them that you can make their life and their business better? Who feels more pressure? You at the moment trying to impress them, or them trying to think and debate objectively about change? Who feels that pressure? Lastly, who defines the value of the conversation? You because you had a fantastic, superb pitch, or the prospect because they were able to put the work in and think different about their business? If you've been listening to our podcast, then you know these answers. You know that the psychology of trust, objectivity, and change are minimally impacted by your expertise, solution, and/or pitch. You also know the best way to help your prospect improve is to help them actually slow down and to really start thinking objectively about their business. In this episode, MJ Insurance Chief Growth Officer and President of Benefits Consulting, Andy Vetor, shares an impressive story of he won a major national account by doing the exact opposite of what all his heavy hitter competition was doing. He didn't pitch his firm's capabilities at all. He sought to understand why the prospect thought change was really needed and was the review process they were investing in necessary. He resisted the urge to do the traditional validation and credentialing and focused on getting clarity with the prospect through his questions. This proved to be a far more trustworthy and impactful approach versus pitching his competency. Warning, if you love your expertise and you've convinced yourself that's why people buy from you, you'll probably want to skip this episode. So, I think about it, Andy, well, first off, I'm glad you're on. This will be fun. And the reason why I say that is, I don't know how long we've known each other. I want to say, I bet you dates back to 2007-ish, 2008 maybe.
I was going to say at least 15 years.
Yeah, at least. I remember coming to MJ, working with you guys, and you and Kevin were there, and you guys were hilarious, but you guys meant business. You guys were definitely focused on growing that business of yours. And that was fun. I think you guys were the two that I look forward to the most every time I visited. You guys would give me a hard time, but you guys would also really press yourself. You guys would really challenge yourself as well. So
I remember those Monday mornings for sure.
Yeah, you two were into it. Maybe a couple other guys were, and half the guys I think were still asleep.
Oh yeah, half the guys were hiding under the desk in the back row, just hoping they didn't get called on.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do. I remember that. I think a really good topic, especially this time of year, right, is just learning to trust new routines that you're trying to get into, right? Learning to trust new skill sets or new mindset. And so, when I thought about this conversation with you, I'm like, all right, Andy and I got to get into conversations, right? How he handles them, how he coaches his teams to handle them. For our audience too, you did a lot of work too. I remember you would call me, you would call Pam, and you were relentless in the sense that, hey, I got this big meeting coming up and I have a list of these questions, but I know I got to call some stuff out. And you literally would be like, I know I've got to create some positive tension here in this conversation. And you were all over. You were like, let's role play it. Let's walk it through. And what's funny is I don't see a lot of professionals have that kind of commitment. If I take 100 professionals in sales,
I'd probably say about 15 to maybe 20 of them would have that kind of commitment.
Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah, Dan, I think back about, my personal journey and even the journey that we've had with your firm and how much of this was really just driven by mindset for me along the way. I mean, just changing my mindset to really being there to seek to understand and to really be there to help them. And when that mindset shift changed for me, I can almost remember the time at which it happened. It was early in, we talked about working together for 15 years. Maybe it was longer ago than that, but it wasn't very far into that relationship where it just became very natural for me. I think you and I have some similar styles. I'm one that's comfortable challenging people, but I have to make sure I do it in the right way, that I'm able to do that in a very trusting and empathetic type of way, because I am willing to lean into sometimes a difficult conversation. And you referenced what I would call just preparation. I mean, reaching out and wanting to run it by somebody else. And I still do that today. I'm not nearly as involved at this point in my career in the prospect presentations as I might have been in the past. But even still today, when I'm involved in those, I'm either myself going to reach out to Pam or maybe even somebody else on our team at this point to get a different perspective on it. And I'm certainly going to encourage our team to do that as well. I mean, it's almost seems counterintuitive to me that, look, anybody to be an expert in something, you need 10,000 hours. If you want to gain your 10,000 hours by doing it live in front of the prospect, I mean, you're going to be an expert in this by about the time you retire. So, I mean, you have to create new opportunities to really get as much live action as you can. And I really think the role playing and preparation for that makes the game a lot easier. In fact, the preparation is probably harder because you're doing it with your peers. They kind of know where you should be going. You're going to be held more accountable. When you get in front of the prospect, you can make a mistake, or you can wimp out at a certain place, or not ask the question you should have asked. If you do that in your prep, somebody's gonna call you out if they're doing it the right way.
Yeah, some of the things that come to mind, and I don't know I think I know the name of the client. I won't say the name. But this was like probably 8 years ago. You guys were competing with a lot of firms, and this client was big. This prospect was big. They were national. They were a well-known name. And I just remember that there were two things that you were focused on. And I know the first one was, we got to learn more. Let's not jump into our expertise. All right, let's make sure we do our due diligence, really understanding where they're coming from and where they think they want to go. That was one. But the other one was, you just wanted to ask this firm, why not just stick with where they are? Why not just keep going on the direction they're going? Because I don't know if anything was on fire. I think that's what I remember. And you did a really good job, I think, where you were like, okay, we got to learn more. Let's not lead with our competency. Can you talk a little bit about that journey, right? Because I mean, we all have that need sometimes, or at least maybe for a while, where we're like, I got to make sure this prospect or this client knows I belong here, right? I got to make sure that they know that I know what I'm doing. I have expertise. I have experience, so that there's that desire to validate ourselves. Can you kind of share a little bit about your journey on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it all goes back to really doing the work on the initial stages. Sometimes people mail it in the first meeting. They're just going in there and they're hoping they can generate a second meeting out of it, but they're not asking the deep questions that really set you up for that finalist presentation, which is ultimately what you're referring to, is this finalist deal that we had. And so we had done a lot of the homework on the upfront with our contact at the prospect to deeply understand what their real challenges were that they were dealing with organizationally. And I know the timing of it because it was at the advent of the Affordable Care Act, and so it was 13 years ago when this meeting took place. So time flies, right?
So I was a little off.
Exactly. Time flies. 13 years ago, and I remember we were sitting. The incumbent broker was eating in their boardroom when we walked in. We're sitting in the lobby. The incumbent firm runs over on time. It's myself and another team member of ours. The third firm who was being interviewed comes in the lobby because this group has run over. They were giving everybody 30 minutes to make their presentation here. And the incumbent walks out, and they have, I would say, north of 10 people for sure. I mean, they've got all navy blue suits walking out of the room, and it was like the scene in Christmas Vacation when those guys walk by Chevy Chase. Like, all those guys walk out of the room, and they leave. And
Is that when you stood up and said, "Hey, kiss my ass, kiss his ass, kiss his ass"?
Kiss his ass. Exactly. Oh my God, that's what it felt like. So I remember walking into that room, and you and I had some conversation in preparation for the meeting. And we sat down, and in some ways I was irritated. I was irritated because it was 30 minutes, and how are they going to make a good decision in 30 minutes about who their partner was going to be for one of their biggest line items in their entire business? And now we're delayed, and they're way behind schedule. Are they even going to be focused on what we're talking about? And I remember going in there and just they told us, "Hey, look, we're not making any decisions today. We just want to get to know people a little bit here." Okay, great. And so opened with a couple of questions. Ultimately, the discovery was, hey, we just need to figure out how we're going to deal with this Affordable Care Act thing that's coming up, and how do we deal with it. And so we just said, hey, all right, look, forget our presentation, forget everything else. Let's just have a conversation about that. We've got another 10 minutes left here. If nothing else, we'll get you back on time. Let's just talk about that and what the implications are for you. Ask the questions that you've been wanting to ask everybody else, and we'll give you our best answer, and you guys take it for what it's worth. So we did. We probably spent 30 some minutes with them. We left. I left frustrated. Again, we didn't talk about our value. We didn't get into some of the other things that I thought were going to be key to them making a decision. Get a call the next morning. We're going with you guys. And in the debrief on it, this is the most powerful thing. Everybody's so hung up, I think, on the relationships and what did I create, and it's all those things. When we got the feedback and they said, why did you choose us? And our contact said, well, they went around the room and they said, we really like the second guys. They didn't even know our name. We really like the second guys. It was just because I think the way that we showed up was so different than everybody else. The third firm that was sitting there had storyboards out in the lobby. They had big black boards that they were going to walk through with them. So we never at one point touched on the value that we created. But I think what the client saw was the experience that we create with our clients and how we go about that, which was the most valuable, I think, part of this whole equation. And that's a client that we wrote in 2012 and is still a client today. So even though I wouldn't necessarily have advised them to go through that process again, the willingness to lean in, and I think it was an inflection point in that meeting. We could have easily started throwing up on the table, and we've got 15 minutes. Let us tell you all the great stuff we do. Here's the people we work with. Here's all the things that are there.
And then you feel that pressure to do it too.
Exactly. I knew that wasn't what was right for them in the moment, right? What was going to be, what do they need to get out of this? And if nothing else, they need to get an understanding of something that it's going to be a real challenge for their business. And it was a major challenge. They were facing a multi-million-dollar Cadillac tax, and they weren't sure how to deal with it.
Yeah, one of the things I know that you do really, really well, and again, it may come a little bit instinctual for you as well, but you do a good job, and you always have, of getting objective, So, right, a lot of times when and I've been there in the past, you get all excited about what you can offer, right? You get excited that your expertise or your value might represent something important to the prospect, right? And so you end up, though, creating a bias, right? Because you can't wait to share it, right? You ask a few questions, hoping that you can guide that conversation to this certain spot, and then you can leap in and be the Superman hero and share your expertise. And the challenge is, and for our listeners in particular, what's happening, though, is that you're showing you're biased, right? The second that prospect shares something that you know that you can help, solve, improve, and you jump in to share, you're actually showing you're biased. And when human beings, when we get a bias, we meet the other person's biased with our own. So we actually use our own biases to protect ourselves when we think somebody else has one. What you've always done is that you've had this ability to say, hey, none of that matters. We just got to go in there and learn. We'll figure out what and if we need to say later.
Yeah, no doubt, Dan. It's not that we don't walk in with a plan. I mean, the plan ultimately is to determine whether or not we can be helpful to these people, and can we help them in the conversation, whether that it means they work with us or somebody else. But the step by step to get there, we're open. We need to be open to what that looks like. And I think we all have to recognize that if we're all sales professionals and we walk in the door of that, that's how we are categorized by that buyer in the moment. Is you walk in the door and you are a sales professional to them, and that comes with certain bias that they put up as well. It's your job to prove otherwise to them in there. And if you can prove otherwise to them by creating neutrality and doing things that are not the patterns that they expect you to do, which are those patterns are, I say something, I show a little bit of vulnerability or pain, as people call it, and that person jumps in to solve, I immediately get recategorized as a salesperson. If I get to the place where that person gives me something that is pain and I don't move to solve, I move to continue to understand more deeply, I think the barrier starts to drop and you get to a place of trust as much as you can in one of those meetings. And now what I tend to see happens is the sharing, the truth starts to come out from the prospect. They now think, okay, I'm safe here. I can share a little bit more of where we're going because it's not going to get used against me. They're not going to jump into solving for me and telling me how they can benefit me here and making it about them. But that's an experience that's required on our side. The prospect isn't going to create that experience. We have to create that experience when we walk in the door. And I see that with our young people. I was with one of our young people a few months ago and in a prospect presentation, and he did a fantastic job. I was very pleased with him. But coming out of the meeting, one of the things I said was like, hey, you were ultimately right about what you shared, but the timing at which you shared it was too early in the process. You needed to go deeper.
Go into that, Andy. What did you notice? What did you see?
Yeah, so I saw them. The prospect shared something that indicated, hey, it indicated to him that, hey, here's a solution that I think might make some sense for you. But it was the very surface level pieces of it. He needed to go about 2 or 3 steps deeper to make sure that he was right, like to validate, am I right in this solution? Because nothing is worse than you jump to solution and the prospect says, well, no, we've already evaluated that and that doesn't make sense for the X, Y, and Z reasons. And you go, oh, gosh, I thought for sure I had something unique here.
Oh, that's such a bad feeling too. It's just, you just kind of feel like the air just got let out of the room.
Yeah. Exactly. So there were just a few, he had to go a little bit deeper and say, okay, you're indicating this fact pattern. How does this impact your business? What decisions have you thought about in the past around this area that could have helped balance that? What have you tried? What was successful? What wasn't successful? There's just a handful of other questions that had he gotten to that, he could have really understood a little bit better. Okay, yeah, no, this is a viable solution. I think they need to consider, but he also has to position that. And he actually did do a nice job of it, a lot of the solutions in our business that we provide are not necessarily unique to our firm. They're conceptual that others could do. So you have to position those things as, hey, this is something that you should potentially consider. Doesn't mean you need to consider our firm to necessarily be the ones that deliver that. But as we look at it, I think it's something that if we were sitting in your shoes, might be on your roadmap to at least evaluate. And I think if you can find that neutrality, it allows people to, again, continue to open up a little bit more because they don't feel like any pain they might reveal is going to be used against them.
This may just be more natural to you now because of the repetition and the work that you've put into it, right? Do you still use like self-talk or activation thoughts before you go into conversations to try to make sure that you are being objective and that you're not labeling something good or bad?
I mean, I have to always for myself when I'm sitting in the car or getting ready to walk into the room, I have to always remind myself of what my purpose is in that meeting. And that for me, this goes back to 15 years ago, is I'm here to help. And being help is not solving their problems or me telling them that we're great and we can be the ones to help them solve that. It's here to help, and help might be just them understanding the problem at a deeper level than what they have even recognized that they have in the past, or recognizing that something they perceive to be a problem is not a problem. That sometimes that is the case.
How did you learn that? I mean, I get it. I'm going to ask a question here that might be hard to answer, and I know that, right? Because it's just it's a process that you've been through, that you've taken yourself through. How did you learn to trust it, though? Is there anything you can share on that, right? Because, right, we get that moment again. But hey, I can solve that. What we do can help them with that. This is the moment where I position us, and so you leap and you jump. Versus, right, what you and I are talking about is the ability to say, hold, wait a minute. Let's find out more. Let's find out how they got here. Let's find out how they view it. Let's find out how they feel about trying to improve it. Is it really worth their time? Let's find out more. How do you learn, Andy, right, to just calm down and be like, no, I'm going to trust this instead?
Yeah, well, you're right. It's a lot of repetition. This is so hard for our young people to really get around, because as soon as it's there, they want to jump in. And so, as with anything else, 10,000 hours to be an expert, it's a lot of time in having spent time in front of prospects. It's a lot of time in role play. There's a lot of things that have gone into doing that. But the ultimate for me is I know the outcomes are more effective when you do take that time to really seek further down the road. And when I say outcomes, that doesn't mean, we end up getting more clients. That probably is true if I'm frank about it. But I think the outcome is more about, am I fulfilling what I wanted to when I walk into that meeting, which is, how can I make sure that I'm helping these people? And when I get to the recognition that helping them is not jumping to solve, that's all about me, right? I have to put them first. They have to be the center of the story, not me. Not our firm. If we're the center of the story, we're off the rails on that front, because it's their business and it's their challenges that they're facing. We're just ones that might help them enable some thinking and some potential solutions that could help them to move their business forward.
As we conclude part one of our conversation with Andy, I want you to be thinking about the expectations that your prospects have every time they join a meeting with you. Are they ready to invest energy and effort, or are they ready to let you do all the work? If you're looking for one powerful adjustment, start with simply slowing down and avoiding the silly temptation to prove expertise. Instead, invest more into learning about the situation or experience that your prospect client has just shared. That inner voice that tells you to talk or pitch is your voice of insecurity. Why not give the microphone to a different voice, one that encourages curiosity and clarity? Remember, when you lead with competency, you're telling your prospect that you're biased. You're wanting some kind of sale or outcome. They will defend themselves against your ideas by using their own biases as they listen. Nobody wins. If you've enjoyed this podcast or any previous podcast of ours, we would be very grateful if you could jump on Apple Podcast and leave a rating and a comment. We've timed the process. It takes less than 90 seconds. Thanks for tuning in.